Hello and welcome to the Point Blank Show. My name is Abhishek, and today I have the privilege of speaking with one of the sharpest minds cricket has ever known, Mike Brearley. He made his England debut in 1976 and captained the side from 1977 to 80. He then was recalled again to lead the side in 1981 in that famous home series that England went on to win. He also captained Middlesex to several memorable victories, including county championships in 1976 and 1980. But his cricketing journey began like it did for many of us, in the gullies. For instance, he would rub linseed oil on his bat each April to get it to have a good stroke. Sports runs in his family. His father was a cricketer and an out-and-out sports person. His mum represented London University in netball before turning to tennis. Mike's talents stretch far beyond the boundary. He dabbled in acting at the age of 8, played the clarinet in school, and studied classics and model sciences at Cambridge, and captained the university as well, where he was a wicketkeeper. He could translate Tennyson into Greek verse back in the day and devoured writers like Jane Austen, Leo Tolstoy, Hemingway, Dostoevsky, and Dickens. A cricketer, a writer, and a trained psychoanalyst, Mike is also the author of several acclaimed books, his latest one being Turning Over the Pebbles, A Life in Cricket and in the Mind. Mike, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we start with your first memories of cricket? I myself grew up in a suburb in Mumbai. It's called Thane, where we would hit the ball against the first floor wall, or maybe hang a tennis ball or a season ball in a sock from the curtain helmet. What was it for you when you go back all those years ago?
Yes, well, it revolved around my father, who was a very good amateur cricketer. I mean, he played twice for Middlesex and once for Yorkshire. He's a Yorkshireman, and he came to live in London just before or just at the beginning of the war, not long before I was born, and lived in London ever since. So, and he used to play club cricket at the weekend, and I would go around whenever I remember going around with him whenever I could and getting him to bowl at me or bat against me before or during tea time, before the match or whatever. And other people who played there who became small-time heroes of mine. But I also saw, when you talked about the ball hanging from the wall and you hitting it against the wall, whatever, exactly, a cloth ball, I made a little pitch for myself against the kitchen wall. And the kitchen wall was very small and at waist height, I mean, to an adult, waist height. Above that, there was a window that I could throw the ball against the bit below the window, hopefully not breaking the window, and land it on my little patch of rolled and cut grass with the stumps behind it, and I would bat and score runs round the wicket. And especially after Jack Robertson, who opened the batting for Middlesex, played very few times for England, and once scored 331 not out in a day against Worcestershire in 1949 when I was 7. And I used to regularly score 300 in the back garden.
Lovely. And at the back garden, you dug a hole in the back garden to get to Australia.
Yes, I think that might have been even a bit earlier than 7, because I can remember the intensity and excitement that I was going to dig a hole to get to Australia. And I'm sure I had some sense by then that Australia was a glamorous place in the cricket world for people who like cricket, like my dad and others of his friends and people I knew. And so I think I got a friend up the road. I remember his name. He was called Frank Saw. And Frank Saw came down. He lost interest before I did. And I think I went on doing it for more than one day or more than one period in an afternoon and continued the next day. And I had this idea that I would get to Australia and there I'd find these strange people who had to walk around upside down on the ceiling, the other side of that. So it was a fantasy, and I was willing to put myself out a bit to get there.
Right. And so much so that I think, did your mum comment that, if you carry on like this, you will do nothing but play cricket and football?
Yeah, I think that was a bit later again, because I linked that, and again, I'm not sure about these timings because one isn't, but when I was 9 or 10, I played my first game of football on a pitch which had markings and a goals posts at each end, as opposed to coats on the ground to mark the goal. And I remember the score, though I think we won 2-1, but we may have lost 2-1. And I remember only one episode from the game that I kicked the ball trying to score and hit the back of a player in front of me, so the ball never went to the net. But my memory of my mother's remark is that although she was very encouraging, I suppose that sometimes I was fanatical and I probably did tread dirt into the house, especially in the football season. And she said something like, if you carry on like this, you'll do nothing but play cricket and football all your life. And I do remember that too.
Amazing. And your dad, you write, was an accomplished cricketer, among other sports. How was it growing up with him? Would he give you catches, for instance? Because that's one thing that all dads do. I've got a 6-year-old, so yeah. So tell us about those days.
Well, he used to make me dive to catch one-handed and in the back garden again. And when we went for a walk on a Sunday after lunch, for example, to the uphill park or the downhill park, we would always have a tennis ball or a football with us, usually a tennis ball, as I recall it. And playing catch on the way up, I would have to be at the lower end of the slope, so that if I missed it, I had to go and fetch it.
Excellent. And how did he comment? What were his comments on your batting? I remember one time when he didn't quite enjoy it when you were blocking an off spinner before I asked you hit him over the top.
Well, that was in my first year in the school team. He was a maths teacher at the school I went to, and that particular school, which was 25% scholarship children, but it was a boys' school. Sons of teachers there could get free education. It was a perk for the staff. And there was a photograph taken with about 20 boys once and about 40 of masters, as we call them, or 29 and 45 masters. So it was quite a regular thing. But when I got into my father was the cricket master in charge of cricket at the school. And I got into the first team when I was 13. Very little, short trousers still. And it was in that one of those, and he umpired sometimes. And it was in one of those matches where I was blocking this off spinner away and afraid to hit over the top. And eventually I hit this off spinner over the top for a 3, went near to the boundary. And he said something to me like, about time too, something like that.
Right.
He didn't say much. He was really rather, I mean, it must have been very painful to him when I had difficulties batting, but he never, ever, he was not one of those people who'd run onto the pitch and shout at their son or daughter in these days. And he once also made me aware of my boasting about my wicket keeping. By the way, I only kept wicket the first year at Cambridge, and I wasn't very good at it, but I did do it then. But he once said to me, we were walking around the cricket ground with Mike Griffith, who captained Sussex and played hockey for England, almost overlapped with me. And his father was Billy Griffith, who'd played cricket for England and was the secretary of the MCC. And I was slightly in awe of Billy Griffith because he had been a professional cricketer and played for England. And though he was a very kind man, slightly wanting to say something about my wicket keeping to Mike Griffith, who was a better wicket keeper than me, much better. And my father quietly afterwards said to me, he thought I was boasting a bit about my wicket keeping when pretending to be modest.
So there was no room for showing off in the.
That was the thing, yes.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I didn't think about it when I was writing the book, but I did afterwards. One of his sayings was, to us children, I had 2 sisters who were younger than me, don't think you're the only pebble on the beach. But I didn't actually put that in the book, which I should have done, really. But that was, again, don't boast too much. It's a very Yorkshire attitude. Yeah. And there was a story he told me about himself playing in one of the Yorkshire League matches in a small town called Heckmondwike in Yorkshire as a boy, a young boy. Well, a teenage boy, late teenage. And he scored 100. And as he came off the field, one of the members with a cloth cap, down-to-earth Yorkshireman said, well played, son. with a Yorkshire
Mhm.
accent, but you wouldn't have scored 100 if your father had been bowling.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
always, don't get ahead of yourself, don't think
Right.
too much of yourself. You've still got a lot to learn. There's that kind of attitude.
Yes, and also this self-deprecating humor. You talked about you being a wicketkeeper, and
Yes,
you again said not remembering being one of the best up there. And you had a little incident with Rodney Hogg, the
yes.
former Australian cricketer, on air. Tell us about it.
I'll tell you, I liked Rodney Hogg, and we got on, actually. For example, 1981, during that Headingley match, he had, when Australia looked as though they were going to win by an innings, he'd come and sat with me on the balcony. Balcony was continuous, but the Australians usually sat outside their dressing room, and we sat outside ours. And he came and
Mm.
sat with me, and we talked and chatted a bit. And then he said, eventually, when Botham and Dilly started to put on their partnership, I think I'd better get back, he said. We get into trouble. So we had that
Right.
relationship, which was
Yes.
playful. And then years later, after we both retired, he was running a radio program in Adelaide, a
Hmm.
cricket program with phone-ins and things like that. Quite popular, I think. And he was very shrewd and good at it. And he said, would I come on this program? Because I liked him and we could arrange a time. He said yes. And so the time came. He said, look, when you get a phone call, you answer it, put the phone down. The next time we phone you, you'll be on air. Fine. So we did this. I picked up the phone. He welcomed me. And then he said, I gather you were a wicketkeeper in your early career. And I said, yes. He said, yes. First year at Cambridge and got me into the team. And he said, and why did you give it up? He said, well, I wasn't very good at it. And he said, but you carried on batting.
Absolutely. And
Coming
this
from him, I could accept that without a problem. But it was
amazing.
quite a sharp remark to
It-
start an
And
interview with.
and there's something about being quick-witted and
Yes.
also having a good sense of humor to be able to
Human.
receive it.
Yes.
And as you did, and you printed that in the book. I
Yes.
also enjoyed reading about your, I think your grandson who was 4 or 5 at
Yeah.
the time when you were pushing him on the swing, which I thought was hilarious. What happened there?
Well, there were one or two stories, but the one that I think you're referring
Yeah.
to is probably in the book, was he used to talk about Indian gods and
Mm,
and Greek gods and things, and he was really interested in those little stories, stories for little children. And one day I was pushing him, and I said, we haven't talked about gods for a long time." He said, "No." He said, "Haven't I don't know whether I believe in God." He said, "Sometimes I think I do, and sometimes I don't."
mm.
And I said, "Well, that's a very respectable attitude, and it's very not unlike my own." And and then there was a pause, and then he swung a bit more, and I said to him, "But you've got plenty of time to make up your mind." And he said, "Yes, Mike, but you don't."
And during these moments, I would imagine you as the grandfather feeling very proud about the fact that, wow, this is really sharp and fast.
Yeah, I
And
do. And he's now reading medicine at Cambridge in his third year, and he's a very delightful boy, young man, and I think he'll do very well in that work.
amazing. More power to him. And when you
Yeah.
were a young man, let's go back to your career. I'm fortunate enough to have watched a few of the highlights on YouTube.
Yes.
And one thing that I felt, and you can correct me here, is that you enjoyed fielding, especially in the slips, because there was
Yes.
one match in August 1979, fourth test against India at the Oval. India was chasing 400 to win.
Yes.
Sunny
Yes.
Gavaskar scored 221. And with 49 runs to win, you gave Botham his 100th wicket, where Gavaskar edged and it flew to first slip where you were standing. You went low down and caught it left-handed. I don't know if it was the 100th wicket, but that was one catch
No.
which would stand even
But,
today as one
but
of the
you're,
best.
yeah, it was a good catch, but it wasn't that match. It was at Lord's, and
Oh, was it? Okay.
and it was in the Test match at Lord's, which was drawn,
Ah,
and it wasn't that exciting match, and it was off Botham. Gavaskar did score 220 something or 200, yes, and but he was caught at mid-on. But yes, well, I thought you were going to talk about that match because there we declared to leave us India 438 or 9 to win, and they ended
mhm,
up 431 for 8. I think is right. But
right.
I think they threw it away because first of all they only needed about 60 or 65 off nearly 20 overs.
Mm,
And suddenly Gavaskar was still in, and Gavaskar got out. And instead of sending the great Vishwanathan, somebody, whoever captain, it might have been Gavaskar himself, or it might have been the manager, sent in somebody who was more of a hitter. And he got out. I can't remember who it was. And they lost wickets. And they ended up blocking the last over, you know. And it was a draw, an honourable and quite dramatic draw, which could have gone any of the ways, you know, 4 ways. Tie, draw, win, loss.
Yes. Is that something about Test cricket that has held the test of time? That if somebody watches the scoreboard, if somebody who knows nothing about cricket, they might, oh, it looks like it was a draw. But only those who watched it, played it, would know the excitement in every passing session.
Well, yes, but except that, of course, you would, if you had the nous to look at the score, you'd see that it was very close to the target score. And with 8 wickets down, that would mean it was very well balanced. But yes, I think there are long periods. Well, there were longer periods. The game has changed, thanks partly to county cricket and one-day cricket, and partly to Stokes and McCullum, I would say, but also to do with India's approach as well and Australia's. So it's not just England, but still it has changed. But there were long periods of which you have to go through, like you do in life. I mean, life is not all excitements and highlights and dramas. It's got the periods in between where someone's consolidating or someone's playing in a very defensive way or boring or, you know, but some of the best forms of parts of Test cricket, as I put in the book too, were sort of Kohli against Anderson or Anderson against Kohli with a newish ball, where there was such respect between the two players for their mutual colossal ability. You know, I thought Anderson was the best swing bowler I've ever seen, and I think Kohli is one of the very best batsmen I've ever seen. And you know, Kohli would be trying to leave as many balls as he could, but you know, they weren't very wide, and they didn't all swing away. Some of them swung in, and so you know, it was a great skill to leave a ball actually, and not get bowled or LBW if it does the wrong thing. And to play at balls, you have to play it without edging them to the slips, and to recover from playing and missing to a perfect delivery. And for Anderson as well, if he dropped one slightly short, Kohli was still good enough to get on the back foot and punch it past cover or drive it on the front foot back past him. So the skill of those players, let's say a crucial hour and a bit, hour and 20 minutes or something like that near the beginning of a test match, or in the first innings of India in the test match, which could turn the whole game. So I love
you love that contest, and you talked about life not being just a series of highlights. The other day, I was talking to somebody. How the person was asking, "I'm married, so when you get into an argument, how do you know which fights to pick?" So I gave him a test match reference. I said you need to be able to leave the ball. You can't if you keep swinging, you might nick one to the first slip. So you should be able to leave the balls.
Leave some of the balls, but you have to go after some of the other ones. Yes, indeed. There's a lovely story about the Buddha. I think that may be in the book too. The Buddha was giving a lecture, the story is, and one of his people who opposed his views, a religious Hindu, a Brahmin, gave a very question time at the end of the talk or the sermon, whatever it was. He was very aggressive in his question and didn't agree with him. And after a while, the Buddha said, if a person leaves a great feast outside your door, who does it belong to? And the Hindu man said, the Brahmin said, well, it belongs to the man who left it there. And the Buddha said, precisely. In other words, if somebody delivers a feast of angry emotion or something like that, well, that's their problem. Let it go.
And let it go. Yes, that makes sense.
But not always. I mean, sometimes you have to take it on. And, you know, for your own resoluteness and pride and, you know, to know so that the other person knows you're there, you have to also take it on. So there's no simple answer, Abhishek.
Thank you, Mike. And you faced some of the fiercest of bowling when it came to knowing which balls to go. literally on the cricket field, because you have only a fraction of a second. Those
Yes,
listeners
yes,
who may not have seen cricket, you probably have one third of a second to make a decision whether to play or to leave.
yes,
You
yes,
batted against the likes of Michael Holding, Andy
yes.
Roberts for hours, and then of course Dennis Lilly, whom you
Oh,
called a
yes,
perfect fast bowler. Tell
yes.
us about what it takes and what is it like when you're facing them. What goes through your mind? What went through your mind back then?
Well, I know some of my limitations, and I mean, one of them is that I had to learn to play on the back foot against really fast bowling because I used to be
Mhm.
a bit coming forward, and but having learned to play a bit better off the back foot, I found that I didn't have that kind of complete speed of reaction, I think, to get
Mhm.
back my weight forward so that I could drive the ball, lean into the ball easily off the front foot. So I would be tending to cut my losses against the really fast bowlers and be on the back foot and hope to score off nudges and deflections and occasionally a push past the bowler, but wasn't very hard push. And I wasn't quick enough in my speed of stroke or seeing the ball early enough to hook with safety against the quickest bowlers. It's not that I never did, but not
Mm.
much and not to great effect. So I would be cutting, I would be aware I had to learn this over many years, practicing playing county cricket and so on. But I had to learn that if you played at a ball away from your body, it seemed to be faster than when it was coming straight at you. When you could line it up, you had
Mhm.
a tiny bit more time to play. So I would try and not play at balls that I didn't have to play at, because then there'd be, first of all, the slips and the wicketkeeper, but also it seemed to be quicker. You were jerking forward or
Yeah.
jerking back. And the great players don't follow the ball. Many of the really top players, they can look as if they're being beaten, but actually, when the ball starts to go where they don't go like that, they
Mm.
just leave their hands there and they've virtually left the ball. John Edrich used to do that, for example. And people thought they were playing a missing all the time, but in a way, they were sometimes just able to let the ball go without jerking out towards it. So that's how I would be thinking. And
Mm.
sometimes I'd be a bit nervous about the short pitch ball and, would I be quick enough to get out of the way? I was the person who primarily introduced into top class cricket helmets on a
Mhm.
regular basis by using a little skull cap made for me by a man in Nottingham who designed headgear for children with epilepsy because they were often falling, hitting their
Mm.
heads. And I used it against the Australians. And Gavaskar had done something similar, but I thought the Australians would mock me for this,
Mm.
macho Australians and all that. But they didn't. But I only learnt that at the end of the series when Rodney Marsh said to me, well, we think you're absolutely right, but it just needs to be more substantial. And within a few months of that, through
Mm.
Australia, everyone except Viv Richards were wearing helmets. I mean, that look more or
Right.
less like helmets now.
Yeah. This
So,
yeah.
so that was something I contributed to top class
Lovely. And
cricket.
and you talked about this macho bit. You don't want to be unsafe there in the dressing room. Sometimes when the captain is speaking, you may not be the captain in the room, but you have to also voice your opinion and be quote unquote macho. There's one incident where you cut Tony Gregg in, requesting him, and somebody else was talking. Was it Mr. Randall? And he said,
Yes, Derek
"Let him
Randall. Yes,
finish." And
yes,
you pretty much told the captain, let him finish. He hasn't finished his
yes,
point yet. So
yes.
how does that culture talk us through a bit about what that incident was, and how do you build a culture where a captain can be openly questioned? And of course, you needed to have the guts and the courage to do that as well.
One of the things that I'm proud of in my captaincy is that two or three, certainly two people who came into the Middlesex team as teenagers or age 20 or quite young, when I was towards the end of my career, have said to me after I retired or long after I retired that in either their first match for Middlesex or their first match at Lord's for Middlesex, in the middle of the afternoon, they were very nervous, obviously. I came up to them and said, "Who do you think we should put on to bowl? What do you think we should do now?"
Mm.
And they both said something pretty nervous. You say, "Oh, I don't know, I haven't thought," like that, quite understandably. And I said, "Well, next time just give it a thought and see what you think." I think that's what I like about that story and I think I could do it with younger players more easily than people who are older than myself, is that I did want to create a team of people who thought about the game and had opinions and were willing to voice them. Not all the time, and something that it could cause, like in a family, like with your 6-year-old son. Sometimes you want him to be quiet, no doubt, and not interrupt and ask yet another question, or when he's a bit older, maybe more. On the other hand, lively families argumentative. They debate, they discuss. You get good ideas. You work it out. They help you to clarify your ideas. They give you new ideas that you haven't thought of, the team and the family. And that seems to me to be a lively, ongoing, slightly risk-taking family or team. And I think it's an important part of growing into a team and becoming a person who can value your own success and need to respect it and pay attention to it, because you won't get picked if you don't score some runs or take some wickets. But also be alert to the team's situation and think about the game. You never know where a good idea is going to come from next.
Right. And you should also be open enough or brave enough to question authority in the moment if you think that is right. And because you also write that you encouraged everyone to think like a captain, which would mean you are trying to generate strong personalities rather than just blindly following your orders. So was it also challenging for you when you captained Middlesex, Cambridge, and later England, of course, where you had strong personalities in the team?
Yes, but of course the strong personalities could be difficult, but so could some of the not so strong personalities or not such exceptional players. But also strong personalities could be supportive. And so, if somebody was being a pain in the neck or was being a bit selfish, the team would also have something to say. Not necessarily at a formal meeting, though sometimes they might, but in informal ways, teasing, joking, So I think it's creating a group, not creating, but helping, facilitating a group that has liveliness, some force, some courage, some ideas, some thinking, and can be bold enough to say some of it without it being a great crisis. Now, I'm not saying I was always successful. Sometimes I think, anyway, I've said enough about the ways in which I'm not perfect.
Because I enjoyed your, I don't know how, it was in Ian Botham's autobiography. He talks about stamping authority, or this little thing that you just talked about, where everybody can get behind a player or can be annoyed with a senior if they are being unreasonable. And one such moment that Botham talks about is in 1980, was it the fourth test as the Sydney cricket ground? It was a challenging pitch apparently, and it had rained a few days. A boycott is said to have taken one look at the pitch and said, "Hey, I've got a sore neck and I won't play." And you didn't quite fancy that.
Well, it wasn't. It was less. I mean, he had hurt his neck, and it was at Brisbane, and he was playing golf after the match, I think, and he'd slipped in a bunker. I mean, that was all it was, a little slip, and he got a stiff neck, and he'd come down to the, and he'd come down to the Test match dinner with a towel, damp towel round, or a towel round his neck, you see, and here's an example of what the England team did. Quite a few of the England team went off and got towels and put it around their own necks and walked around like this, you see, like this. You see, in other words, to say, we've got your eye on you, Geoffrey.
Right.
Now, what I did on that match, and the extraordinary thing about that match was it was the New Year's January test against Australia at Sydney. And the ground staff had gone off to their New Year's Eve party without covering the pitch because there wasn't any rain forecast. And this had rained for the next 3 days up to the match. So it was soaking wet, and hard underneath. And they, on the morning of the test, the start was delayed. And it looks as though it might well be delayed till the next day when Geoffrey might have possibly recovered from his wounded neck, which I'm sorry, he had a stiff neck. But the question was, would he be better with a stiffish neck than the next best player without a stiff neck? And on a difficult pitch against Australia, I thought he would be, because he was a very, very fine player. And when it looked as though there was going to be an inspection just after lunchtime, I told Geoffrey, look, Geoffrey, I know you're uneasy. I want you to go and have a net and see how it goes. And I sent along, I think it was Wayne Larkins, who possibly would have got his place if Jeffrey didn't play, an opening batsman. And I said to Wayne, have a look at Jeffrey. Don't listen to him, but just have a look at how he's actually playing and how he's moving. And I want to know what you think when you come back. So he came back and he said to me on the quiet, well, he is a bit stiff and he's a bit more open stance than he might otherwise be, but he looked pretty, not he's playing pretty well. So I thought, well, that's good enough for me. And Jeffrey hedged and hummed and hawed and didn't want to say he was fit and was a bit worried about his reputation and eventually it was about 15 minutes before the match was due to start. Greg Chappell was outside our dressing room with his blazer on, waiting to go out to toss up. I told Jeffrey he had to play and played. Didn't get many runs.
But there are times when you need to, as a captain. Oh, you lost the toss.
And yeah, I thought if we won the toss with Underwood in our side, we win the match. But if we lost the toss, we might win the match, 50-50.
Yeah.
But we lost the toss and lost the match. Anyway.
Yes. This is an example of how, even if someone's senior, but the captain has to do what is right in the moment.
I was proud. I thought I did the right thing. Yeah. And Jeffrey didn't hold it against me, or not for long.
No, I think there are enough articles out there where he says that you are the best captain he played under. He's pretty vocal about that as well.
Very generous in that way. And he used to say to me occasionally, you leave the batting to me, Mike, and I'll leave the captaincy to you. The man management to you, he said.
Much on the lines of what Ian Chappell once told you, didn't he? Where he said, you leave, what was it about? Appealing. Yeah. Please help me.
Yes, I squeezed the ball to slip. And of course, it was a Yorker. And I played it into the ground, but very close to, and they appealed. The umpire gave me not out. And I sort of said, well, it bounced, you see, like that. I gestured. And he said quietly to me, Ian, who I also liked, he said to me, Mike, he said, you do the batting, we'll do the bowling and appealing, leave the umpiring to the umpire. And he did. He was a real Australian. He didn't walk if he nicked it, but if he was given out, he'd walk off the ground and nobody would know he'd been given out incorrectly, which is a perfectly respectable attitude.
Absolutely. And I think Shane Warne once said that if you walk when the umpire has not given you out, then that's dissent.
Yeah, I know. It's a sort of a slight exaggeration, but still, I like his point. I was brought up in the other tradition in county cricket that it was the way to play cricket. Being cricket, what is cricket? What's the ethics of the game is to walk. But that could be not always honoured. You could by people who profess to honour it too.
And I think the confusion is some people walk, or some cricketers walked when they were in their 20s, the score, but nearing their 50s or 90s wouldn't. So that would only cause confusion. So you may as well let the umpire do his bit. And now with Hawkeye coming in and with technology,
it's much better. It's wonderful. I love that.
And how would you, one of the things about, spirit of the game about which you've written.
Yeah, the spirit. That's what the phrase I was trying to think of.
Yes, and how would you, look at things that happen on the pitch, which are in good humor? Like, for example, I love this story about Mike Atherton not walking, and the wicketkeeper, I think it was Ian Healy in Australia, saying, you cheater, or some such. And Atherton simply at the end of the over said, when in Rome, dear boy. To
yes. Good comment.
Yeah. So that's a good comment where he stayed true to his colors. He again went by what you said, let the umpiring with the umpires. And I love the anecdote that you have in Spirit of Cricket about what Joe Root did to the West Indian fast bowler when there was a slur about something, which is quite something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm not sure I can quite remember the detail of it. It was a fast bowler.
Yes, it was Gabriel. I forget his last name suddenly. And I think there was something to the tune of he called
You like boys.
You like boys, yes. And Root was smiling. And he's got that annoying grin about
that annoying grin. Wonderful player. A lovely chap. I'd love to have him in any team I played in, obviously. But he said something like, "It's all right who I like. It's up to
Yes,
me who I like." Something
and
like
there's
that.
not, yeah, there's nothing wrong in being gay. Don't use it as a slur or some such.
I've said that.
Yeah,
That's right. And
right.
it just came
Which,
straight out.
yeah.
But by the way, that was what happened with the Tony Gregg comment I made. Let him finish, because that has happened to me 10 years, 9 years before, when I went for my interview at Newcastle University to be a lecturer in philosophy. And the man in charge of the philosophy department, who was one of the panel of 4 professors who interviewed me, said, when the law professor cut across me, he said to the law professor, "Let him finish." And I thought that was a turning point for me. And suddenly it came out just without thought, it was spontaneous in
Right.
that pre-match dinner before the centenary test at Melbourne, when in fact Randall scored 174 in the second innings. So I take all the
Amazing.
credit for that.
As you should. And one of the biggest controversies these days is Ashwin is in the news. You would have seen very often,
Yeah.
every other year, and we all talk about mankading, which has become a phrase in cricket. What is your Vinu Mankad?
Yes.
What are your views on the subject? And I like how you quoted Gavaskar about
Yes.
why do we have to call it mankading and why not Browning? Because
Browning.
he was the bowler. Sorry, he was the
Yes.
batsman who kept backing off,
Yes.
and despite
That's
being
right.
warned,
Yes.
he
Traditionally, in my upbringing, and until, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, I would have been pretty clear that I thought it was a bad thing to brown the batsman. But I saw a match at Lord's, one day match between Sri Lanka and England were trying to score, I don't know, something like 7 or 8 runs and over, and they had to put on a stand. It looks as though they might win. It's quite close. And I noticed that the main batsman, can't remember, I might have been Joe Root, was batting, and he was hitting the ball. They had a long on and a long off, and he hit it up there. And the non-striking batsman, I can't remember who it was just now offhand, it's in the book, the Spirit of Cricket book, it would take advantage of a yard or two to get down to the other end to get back for the second. And he was running to the danger, it would be running to the danger end. And the off spinner for Sri Lanka, a young chap, I think, stopped and said, "Look, you've gone ahead too early." And then the second time he ran him out. And I think the team had told him, if he does it again, run him out. And there was a big outcry against this. And I realized, on those circumstances, the bowler's right. The fielding side is right. The man was,
right.
I don't mean he was cheating. He was just over enthusiastic, but he was taking advantage. And you can't do that. It's not right.
Right.
And I realized that the main thing is that, you do silly things. If you're batting and you let the ball go and the wicketkeeper standing up and you have your toe on the line, nobody objects to him stumping you. Everyone would say, and would always have said. But just because you're at the other end and you're backing up, why shouldn't you be just as careful about not leaving the crease until you see the ball's left hand? So I thought the main person responsible for these events is the batsman. I still am uneasy about it in my heart of hearts. I would hope I wouldn't do it unless I thought they were trying to steal a run, and I might try and tell them, "Look, if you do that again, we're gonna run you out," to the batsman. It's not on. But so but I switched. I've shifted.
Yes. As it is, it's a batsman's game rather. You benefit of the doubt goes to the batsman. You've got big bats, more shorter boundaries. I think Anil Kumble once said that we are the labor class.
Yes,
It's
that's
more
right.
like, thank you for coming. It's like that. It's becoming that.
It's a good comment. Good comment.
Yes.
And they used to say, "Whistle down the mine and we'll get up a Yorkshire fast bowler or North Country fast bowler from the mine, or shake the palm trees and you'll get a West Indies fast bowler." But they're the labourers, you're right. Hard work.
Yes, yeah, the hard work. Yes, absolutely. And that's why I think somewhere you joke that they are the ones who never get knighted. The knighthood.
Yes.
It's the batsmen who usually
Almost
get the
always.
honors.
Almost
Almost
always.
always.
Yes.
One of those batsman was Ian Botham, and I know everybody must have hounded you for since it happened back in 1981. But for our listeners, I would like to give a little bit of a background. Is that Botham had just been, Botham had resigned from after a miserable first test, and in the previous
Second
match he had
test.
made a second test, sorry,
Yeah.
and he had made a pair, and one of them
Yes.
was a golden duck at Lord's. So things were bad as it is.
Yes.
You are
Yes.
recalled. Things 227 is what you need to score just to avoid the follow on. 500 to 1 are the odds
Yes. Yes.
against Australia. Graham Gooch is out twice in the same day. And
Yes.
you've got 3 hours to go and another day's play to go. What is the mindset in the dressing room, Mike? What happened that evening when you had Graham Dilley, a tail ender, Ian
Yes.
Botham at the crease?
Yes.
I think you had pretty much checked out of the hotel room as well, didn't you? Because
I
you didn't
did.
really
I checked
feel
out. And I
the
thought I'd better.
entire cricket team.
And I wasn't going to bat again in the match, obviously. It
Yeah.
was something like, I don't know, something for 5, I think, already. And
Uh-huh.
not many for 5. Well, and then I thought I'd better put some cricket clothes on. And I did. But no,
Yeah.
I mean, people are realistic. They're not stupid. But and I think it was also, in a way, that helped at the start because Ian Botham and Graham Dilley had complete license
Yeah.
to let their hands go, to play any number of shots they felt like playing, which I think in a way on that pitch was also quite a good tactic for many batsmen, not for Geoffrey Boycott, but for most batsmen. And I thought actually Boycott played very well in that innings. He got a very slow 46
Yes.
in one innings. And it was a skillful innings. It was a good pitch to bowl on. And eventually it then got to the point where we were sort of close up to their score with 3 wickets in hand, and then past their score with Chris Oldin and a little bit later, and then overnight we were about 120 ahead with 9 wickets down, both of them still 140 something not out, Willis about 2 not out. And we knew we had a chance, but if we could get another 30 or 40 we'd have a better chance. But everyone knew. And I remember saying on the next day that after lunch, when we'd taken 3 wickets for no runs just before lunch, so 56 for 1, chasing 129 or 130, had become 56 for 4. I said to Bob Taylor, who was keeping wicket, probably the chances are we'll still lose, but we've got a good chance as well. Now, that was my attitude. Some people would say you should never admit that you don't have that you're unlikely to win. But I never thought that, Well, there's a nice story about Lily and Marsh playing for Western Australia against Queensland in a one-day match. I think it must have been a semi-final, and it was at Perth on their home ground. And they were the 2 best teams. Western Australia had several test players, and Queensland had Greg Chappell and Viv Richards and some fine bowlers, Jeff Thompson, I think. Western Australia were all out for, you could probably correct me, 76, 67,
Yeah, 77.
78,
Yeah.
something
Yes,
like
that was about it. Yeah.
Before lunch, they were sitting in the dressing room, and Rodney Marsh was captain, and he was giving a bit of a speech to the players, and he said, at least let's get a few wickets to please the home crowd. And Lily came in furious and said, swear words omitted. He said, don't talk about a few wickets, we're going to win. And he bowled 4 lethal bouncers at Viv Richards in the first over. Viv came in first, opened batting and strutted out there, and was jumping around, and then bowled a perfect ball that bowled him. Perfect length, came back, hit the top of the stumps. And he took 4 for 19, and they won by something like 17 runs.
15 runs. Yeah.
Yeah. That was
Amazing.
That was a salutary thing. But it's not so much about not admitting it, but it's a matter of still going absolutely full out, even if the chances are strongly against you. And I'd always admired that. I admire teams that fight for a draw if they can't possibly win as well.
And sometimes this communication, Mike, I saw that BBC documentary just last night, the entire 1981, the Headingley, among others, where There is a point in the match where Ian Botham, after having hooked, pulled, edged, and all of that, he looks in
And
the dressing room just to look at
yes,
your
yes,
reactions. And
yes,
you are, I mean, he was worried whether you're going to ask him to try and stay
yes.
on the wicket. And you do something interesting there, don't you?
Well, there were two such things in that match. One was in the first innings where he had a go at a short ball from Lilly that rose up past his gloves and his chin,
Mhm.
and then he looked at me, and had been out of form, and and I said, "Enjoy yourself, keep playing," because I thought
Yeah,
on that pitch for him, he would be
yeah.
better off playing as a hitter than trying to be anxious about what the ball
Hmm.
might do next. In the second innings, there was something about my saying going like this to Chris Old. And that was to get Chris Old to try and stay in line. And I didn't mean to stop hitting the ball, but to
Mhm.
really get determined, to fight for it. Botham should continue the way he was playing. He was in with number 10 batsman, or number
Yeah,
9, 10, I think. By the way, we're nearly
amazing.
at time.
Oh,
And we
yes, indeed.
haven't talked a great deal about psychoanalysis.
Yes, you're right. And let's move on to the career that you've had after the game. And well, you also did it while you were playing, and you must have had a hard time in the morning, 6 o'clock. You do your analysis, and then
Occasionally,
you
yes.
go out to a toss at 11. Talk us about that. And what did this profession help you in cricket and vice versa?
Vice
Both.
versa.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was often asked if my quote psychology helped me in my cricket, and I would say to people, and it was true really, that it was more the other way around, and that getting the best out of players, not always, but trying to, and being shrewd and careful and building a proper team and getting the confidence of the players so they could say things like you mentioned earlier, even if I didn't like the sound of them. Those were all important things in becoming a psychoanalyst. And listening to people, trying to find out where they were, trying
Mm.
to know what suited them or what didn't suit them, where their difficulties lay, when to confront somebody and when not, or that sort of thing. Because sometimes you have to confront people, as we've in fact mentioned. So I thought those things were important, but it took me a long time. I was a pretty late developer in both areas of life, really, and it took me a long time. I thought humour was important in cricket too. There were different ways of making a point, and sometimes humour was a good way of making a point. And I thought that there were other things to do with playing. For example, in each case, you have to have some knowledge of repeatable things and general things that happen. You have to groove your shots. You have to practice. You have to learn the discipline and technique. But you still have to be open to be relaxed enough to be have some spontaneity when you're actually doing it. You don't have time to work these things out when you're facing Michael Holding or when you're bowling to Viv Richards or whatever. So I thought discipline. I thought the fact that there's a context in which different things can be said from everyday life and still recovered from. In analysis, the sort of unspoken rule is say what comes to your mind. It might be impolite, it might be rude, it might be sexual, it might be seductive, it might be embarrassing, shameful, but those things are the idea is that you can say that and that can be a part of you and it can be thought about and understood in a way that takes seriously the emotion involved and aroused, but doesn't get reduced to sheer emotionality. So I think in all those ways, and the book, Pebbles, Turning Over the Pebbles, is a lot about sort of stepping stones that I could vaguely see ahead. I would no idea where it would end, but stepping stones including something to do with religion, something to do with literature, something to do with philosophy, something to do with everyday life, family life, something to do with psychology and working in the clinic for disturbed adolescents, or indeed a
Mm.
cricket team. These were viewed in retrospect were stepping stones. So they might have ended up somewhere else and chance comes into it too. So that's
Amazing.
what I wanted to say too.
And empathy is also that what you write is so
Empathy.
important in because Bob Willis, another character in your
Yes,
team, had to be
yes,
handled differently as compared to Ian Botham.
yes,
So how did
yes.
you that I don't want to use the word man management, but more like empathy. How did you deal with Bob Willis where
Well,
I hear or I read that you had to put an arm around him whereas you would tease Ian Botham that you are like a
Yes.
sidestep queen. My
Yes,
grandmom
that's
can bowl faster than you, or
that's
whatever.
right. Yeah. Well, it's partly through learning through mistakes, that if I said to Bob Willis he was running in like a wounded camel, and I don't know if I ever said that to him, but I thought it was. I may even have said it because thinking he would take it as a joke and feeling that he was actually quite hurt by it. It didn't help. Whereas Ian would have been more rebarbative, like that, sort of reactionary, and said, "Oh, I'll show him, what a cheek to say that to me." And, other people too would talk about what worked with people. And I would listen to what somebody said about how they didn't like being talked to by a captain or authority figure. And it didn't seem helpful. Some batsmen didn't like captain to come up to them before they went into bat and said, "Get stuck in, get really stuck in." They'd say, "Leave me alone, let me do it my way," So you had to be, you just noticed and tried your best.
Amazing. Lovely. I know we are right at the stroke of 1 hour, and I don't want to take any more time of your mic. Thank you so much. Congratulations yet again on
Thank
all
you.
your books, including the most recent one. And there are a bunch of other things to talk about, but hopefully some other day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And one final thing. One of my mentors has also seen you play long ago, when during his younger days, and this is what he had to say about you. And his name is Daniel Franklin. He's the executive editor at The Economist. And let me know what you think about it. He says, when I said, what does Mike Brearley mean to you? And he says he was a patrician without being snobbish, upright in stature and in reputation. He led by intellectual and temperamental example rather than by playing prowess. Would you agree with the whole assessment? Yeah.
It's quite a nice. I don't know about patrician, but I think I know what he means. And I did have as I say in the book, there were streaks of arrogance. And actually one needs a little bit of arrogance or boldness or self-confidence as well. So yes, I think that's a very generous remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So I will introduce you at the beginning, Mr. Brearley, and then I get straight into it. Does that work?
Sure. Perfect.
Okay. So here we go. I want to call you Mr. Brearley is fine. Mike, what would you prefer?
You can call me Mike or Michael, whichever you prefer. Yes, that's fine.
Thank you.
My granddaughter said a year ago, she calls me Mike. She said, "Mike, you have 3 names." And I said, "Is this in the book?" I think it might be. And then she said, no, it was more recent. And then she said, "You're Mike, Michael, and Michael."
I might
take your pick.
Yes, I'll do that. Perfect. Here we go.